Think about this question that I'm getting ready to propose to you. We would love to know who's in the room tonight. If you're a resource parent, a child care worker, a social worker, an educator, a therapist, or even someone that I have not mentioned yet, drop your role in the chat box. Okay? Are you a parent? Are you a resource parent, child care worker, social worker, educator, therapist? And here's what I'm sharing with you. We often see the word other. We're going to ask you to think about it this way. Have I not said your title, but we need to know who you are that's in the room tonight? Okay? Just take a few moments and drop it in the chat box. That'll help all of us show up and be in community with each other. And then that will also help me to individualize the information that I'll be sharing with you this evening. And here's the last thing. And while you're at it, go ahead and share with us why you showed up this evening. What brought you to tonight? Okay, we'll take a couple of moments to do that together.
Senta, if you'd like, I'm going to share a few of the things that are coming through in the chat box. We have some early childhood family support specialists. We have family resource specialists, program directors for nonprofits, clinical supervisors, early childhood family support specialists, parents, grandparents. We have some people came, like your friend Lori Jordan, because you're the speaker tonight. We have parents and so excited. We are parent partners, sent it to me so I can do it. So I know my 3 kids need help on and for the coworkers. So excellent. A lot of different mixed people in our audience, a preschool teacher, an educator, a mom of a daughter, mental health coordinator, wanting to gain greater support for the unit that she oversees, counselors, Housing Authority of Ventura County, educators, administrators, CPS worker. Wow. I'm an aunt. I love that. And adopting once you get approval. There's so much happening.
Beautiful,
We
beautiful.
have our Mesteco community here, independent living coordinators for transitional youth. So we just have a full house of experts and advocates, and so exciting.
Very exciting and a great way to begin tonight so that we can all show up and be in community with each other. I was looking for my emojis and I could not find them. So if I could throw up a heart, a few hand claps. Thank you, Dr. K. Love the fact that we have such a diverse group. Lori, I don't see you on the screen, but I love the fact that you showed up tonight. That feels really good. And welcome, all of you. And as we enroll ourselves in this process, I shared with you a few moments ago that this information can be used for all children. As a matter of fact, in full disclosure, I have used these practices and strategies with my own children. So we ask you to relax, open your heart, your mind, and let's navigate a really powerful experience together tonight. There are 4 desired outcomes and opportunities that we are going to introduce to you. So in other words, when all is said and done and we say goodnight, and you return back to your family, your loved ones, your dogs, your cats, whomever it is, there are 4 things that we anticipate that you're going to walk away with. And those things are positioned right here on the slide. It's what invited you to show up tonight when you saw it on the flyer. So I'm not going to read them out loud, but there are a couple of points that I do want to make. The very first one is everything we're going to talk about tonight is a response to social justice. And what I mean by that is there's a whole body of information that has helped us to understand children in a more deep and profound way. So we know about social emotional learning. Tonight, what we're introducing is let's expand that body, right? So children often have all kinds of feelings that they have going on inside, but they don't have the words to articulate what is happening. And we want to invite children to begin to understand when their heart is beating incredibly fast, that that's information about their body. There's some children that will know that and recognize it, and there's some children that need to be taught that. So when we start that teaching and enrolling children to create environments where they can understand more about themselves and we create safe and emotional spaces, in actuality, we are creating social justice opportunities for our children, and we're living out in a space called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's an incredibly important piece to hold both in mind and heart as we move through our time together. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is just take a few moments and look at those 4 desired outcomes and opportunities. And I want to keep you active and going tonight, so I'm going to ask you to drop it in the chat box. What words look familiar to you? Just take a few moments, look at those 4 points, and see what words look familiar to you. And once you catch one of those words, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Okay? Thinking about what looks familiar.
Senta, would you like me to read a few of them aloud?
Absolutely.
Neuro-relational, trauma-trained interventionist, that's who's in the call. Some of the words that look familiar are social interactions, processing, sensory integration, sensory processing, safe, emotion regulation, safe physical and emotional environment, safe. So there's a couple of the words that are popping for everyone. Parent-child interactions, physical safe environments.
Excellent. Let's build off of what's familiar and let's step into a courageous space and ask, what are you curious about? So maybe you come with a wealth of knowledge or expertise or background, but tonight you're curious to know, how is Senta and childcare training consortium, how are we going to cover that information this evening? So you may recognize the word, but you're curious about how it's going to be covered this evening. And if we could read a couple of those things out loud, because it's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anytime you come to a training, you want to make sure a professional development session or a learning opportunity that you walk away with something or it builds upon what you already know. So let's just,
Curious about the international perspective,
nice.
integration, processing, parent-child interactions, curious about triggers and how to help me process them, how to help, curious about sensory integration, curious about trauma, or it may be the word they recognize, how to help.
That's a great start, Dr. K. I appreciate that. And again, as we move through the night, use the chat box as an opportunity for us to stay connected and to interact with each other. And now that I have a little bit of a grounding in regards to what you're curious about, I can begin to customize and individualize this conversation we'll be having this evening. The last thing I'm going to ask you to do, and again, it's grounding to be able to know who's in the room tonight with all of us. I'm going to ask you to think about the following question. And we're going to poll this, and Jackie's going to help us out, or Dr. K, with this information. But let's think about a scale of 1 to 5. And I'm asking you to think about your experience with sensory integration on a scale from 1 to 5. 1, I have very little experience, to 5, I have a lot of experience. Okay, 1 to 5. Let's take a couple of moments to do that with each other.
Jackie, were you able to bring the poll up?
Yes, it's being answered right now. We have it's moving up, the number keeps going up, but we're at 66% right now.
Nice, thank you. I only asked Jackie because it never pops up on my screen, I guess because I'm part of the hosting team. So I'm always making sure. So many great interactive ideas coming through the chat box, Senta. It's exciting.
We're at 85%. Should I go ahead and close it, or should I wait and see if anybody else can answer?
Let's give it another minute. I bet we can do 100%. This is an interactive group. And Senta, some people are still curious about what this looks like in schools and curious how to help with emotion regulation. And some people would say they may not have gotten the poll. So Jackie, are we close to 100? And Senta, would you like her to move on?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Jackie. We can close it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see the results, Senta?
Thank you so much, Jackie. We have a range of experience in the room, and let's just keep that in mind as we continue to travel through this process together. We're all walking into the space, showing up with a range of knowledge, information, and experience. Our goal this evening is to shift those numbers, right? We want those numbers to go up. So by the end of our time together, I'm going to ask you, do you know the eight sensory systems that belong to the human species? Do we know what those eight are? I'm going to ask us to think for a moment about, did I walk away with at least three new strategies or points of information that I did not have prior to coming into the space tonight? Okay, if we could just land right there, we've done good as a learning community this evening. Okay, so on that note, I want to share a couple of things. Think about this. There are a lot of important assumptions to make together as a community because we all come with our unique relationships and understanding about how we believe our learn and develop. And I'm just going to, yeah, one second. I tried to, I forgot I'm not a host, so I tried to mute. But here's what we're asking you to think about. We all arrive in this space with our own assumptions about how children grow and develop, and we probably have our own assumptions about why children behave the way that they behave. There are a few assumptions that we're going to ask for you to embrace. We hope that you will hold on to them long after tonight, but for the sake of this evening, let's begin with a couple of assumptions to make as a learning community. The very first one, we're going to ask you to embrace the concept of child first, people first language. And basically, what we're sharing with you is to see the child before the concern. So you might say, I think I've heard of sensory processing or sensory integration when I was working with children with autism, or there was a child that I resourced in my home that had a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I think I remember hearing something about sensory processing. Wherever we are in that experience, we're just going to ask you to embrace this notion that every time we talk about a child or we present a concept or an experience regarding a child, we see the child first and their disability or something that might be different or challenging or of concern, that we see that second. The other thing we're going to share with you, and if Dr. K was here, I'm sure she would unmute her mic, meaning here sitting beside me, co-facilitating this experience. She would say behavior is a form of communication, and all forms of behavior are forms of communication. So as we talk about sensory processing and integration, keep that in mind tonight, that everything that a child does, it has purpose. We may not be able to understand it and see it as the adult, but it has some type of purpose that is communicating something to all of us. The other thing I want to share with you is that in a time where referrals are incredibly high in special education concerning children of color, I want to introduce to you this understanding that it may not always be a disability that a child may be demonstrating some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. It may not always be because a child is trying to be defiant. It may not always be because a child is in a grief or trauma experience. It can be that the child has no way of communicating what they're feeling and what they're processing on the inside. And the best way that they can demonstrate it is through their behavior, is through their emotions. And so we're going to ask you to think about that because the referral rates are incredibly high. And what we're finding is that there is a relationship and people thinking that because a child demonstrates the types of behaviors we're going to talk about this evening, that disciplinary actions are happening. And unfortunately, children are being fast tracked into systems that they don't belong to and they shouldn't be in. So we want to expand our thinking about there are so many different ways why a child might be behaving the way that they're behaving. And tonight, we're landing in this space called sensory integration, sensory processing. And we all know the power of relationships. It's the greatest strategy, if nothing else, that we all have and the capacity to use with children. So just remember that as an important agent of change are the types of relationships that we build with children. Those are the assumptions I'm just going to ask you to hold on to. For those of you who are like, Senta, I already knew that. I've been operating that way for a very long time. Just know that there's a system of evidence-informed, evidence-based practices that would support exactly what you've been doing. For those of us that may be new to some of these concepts, we invite you to embrace them, to uphold them, because they will serve you well as you continue to serve children. So let's think for a moment about this. you didn't know you were coming tonight and you were going to have an experience with fashion. So I'm going to ask you to take a few moments and choose a pair of sunglasses. So take a look at the screen and see which glasses are you connecting with this evening, right? What shades? Is there a shape? Is there a lens that you're connected to? But just take a few moments and choose a pair. Oh, I like those. Okay. Dr. K came with her own glasses this evening. Just asking you to take a few moments to choose a pair, something that you're connecting with. And the reason why we're asking you to do this is because glasses can bring things into focus, right? It can create more clarity, and at times it can also obscure things, okay, depending on the type of shades or the lenses that you're using. Tonight, we're going to ask you to think about the multiple lenses that we could use to interpret and better understand children's behavior, to interpret and better understand their growth and development, and to interpret and understand why sensory processing and integration can serve as a clue and a body of information that we could tap into to better understand our children. Okay. And the other thing we're going to share with you, there's something called lens to mirror. The idea is you can put on some glasses, some lenses to see things a little bit differently. And there are times where we actually need to remove the glasses and look at ourselves. So tonight is dedicated to the children, but equally important, tonight is also dedicated to you as the adult that's responsible for the care and education of children. So we're going to use it twofold. We're going to think about the children and we're going to think about ourselves in this process. And so this is just a fun way for us to think about it. Choosing a pair of glasses. Somebody's already been on the screen. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you, think about this for a moment. Have you ever been in an experience where something has either disturbed you, it's made you shriek, it's made you irritated, it's made you nauseous, it's made you want to retreat or get out of the space? And these are just a couple examples. Someone has circled gum popping. So I want everyone in the room to think about what are those things that tend to disturb your peace, for lack of better words, disturb your peace. Right? Is it tags on the back of your clothing? Sometimes I know I have girlfriends that will not purchase the clothes that have the fabric tags, but they'll do the clothes that have the print on the back so there's not the irritation on the back of the neck. The smell of perfume, pantyhose, but just take a few moments and better yet, drop it in the chat box. Talk to me about, are there ones that you're like, Senta, I can't deal with the gum popping? Jello in my mouth. It kind of gives me the shivers. Too much sun. What is it when you look at this list that make you either retreat, get irritated, feel nauseous?
I see some things coming in, Senta, and people are saying between the one with spikes and they're talking about the sunglasses. People are saying wearing shoes, gum popping comes up. These are things that are thinking about. Crowds, that's an interesting one. Crowded places, chewing with your mouth open. Crowded places comes up a few times. Gum popping is popular. And let's see, tags, perfume, bright lights, cold showers, crowded places, wool on skin, too much noise from different sources at the same time, not on the list, but that's one that teacher Hope likes to share. Crowds and crowded places, definitely a big one.
And Hope, thank you so much for dropping your insight into the box. And thank all of you for participating in that, because there might be things that are not listed here. But when you think about it makes your skin crawl, for lack of better words, or it makes you irritated or nauseous, or it makes you shriek, or just it disturbs your peace, makes you feel a little uncomfortable. The reason why we're starting here is because it's a beautiful introduction to the body of work that Jean Ayres brought to the forefront during the 60s when she introduced us to this concept of sensory integration. And I start here because if we could land in a place and thinking about those things that tend to bother us or disturb our peace as adults, we can begin to empathize and understand how that might affect the life of a child. So this next element that we're going to go into, for those of you that were like, what is this sensory processing, sensory integration? What is it that we're really talking about? I want to share with you directly some information that would be very helpful in deepening our understanding. And for those of you who have a lot of experience and that has a background in this, let it be an affirmation for what you already know, okay? The interesting part about sensory integration and sensory processing is that the terms are often used interchangeably, and across disciplines, we cannot come to a place where we can all really agree that this is what it is. So for the sake of our time tonight, I'm going to lift up the work of Jean Ayres, who is the originator of this body of information. She came up with not only a theory, but she came up with a method in understanding how to support children that may have sensory integration or sensory processing concerns. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Take a few moments and look at the slide. And you'll see sensory integration is the ability of a person to take in a variety of sensory input, process, understand it. And here's what we really want to hone in on. It's not just what's coming in, how they're processing and understanding it, but it's how the child is using it to make meaning and to be able to cope and move through their environment and process what's coming into their system, right? So really we want to understand sensory integration is not only the process of understanding it and the input that's coming through, but also how to use it. When we talk about sensory processing, it's just that, it's a process for how the brain receives, how we organize the information, how we engage in the information, and how we understand what's happening internally to our bodies. And then how we make meaning of that through our experiences on a daily basis. And I'll go into some other details a little bit greater so you have a context for what it is that we're talking about. But we're just going to ask you to pause for a moment and look at those two approaches. One is talking about how we use it. The other one is the process for understanding it, right? So we're going to use those two ideas as we move through our time together. The other thing I'm going to do is introduce a concept to you that many of you may already be familiar with, but it is called neurodiversity. And there's a lot of research and information that has sprung up since the early 90s in regards to really looking at differences in understanding that we all move through life and we all process information differently, and that's okay. That's okay. And so the neurodiversity movement is really helping us to understand the experience of how we interact with the world in many different ways. And again, there's no right or wrong or right way to do it. It's all about how we learn, behave, and process our experiences. So I'm asking all of us in this room this evening to think about those three concepts tonight: sensory integration, sensory processing, and neurodiversity. And let's continue to go into it a little bit deeper. So there's plenty of information out there. We want to share a little bit with in regards to the evidence and understanding that sensory processing disorders is often connected to anxiety-based disorders, and that there is a genetic component to sensory processing disorders. So what do we mean by that? In essence, when you experience or have a child that has been officially diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder, anxiety may often be attached to that experience. When we talk about the sensory system and how we take in information, like many of you talked about the gum popping or the crowded rooms, our bodies respond to that. And when it's unpleasant, it does create anxiety. If it happens for us as adults, it definitely happens to the children. For a lot of children that have acquired secondary trauma due to prolonged hospitalizations and medical trauma, it's very common for children to have sensory processing disorders. The other thing I'll share with you is that it's a core feature of children who have been diagnosed, and even adults diagnosed with autism, Fragile X syndrome, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and then also understanding that children who have been prenatally exposed to drugs or alcohol are also impacted by sensory processing disorders. The last two statistics should alert us that 40 to 90% of the children in early intervention are clinically referred for sensory processing. So there are a lot of children that are coming through the early intervention system, and I know we have a lot of early intervention specialists in the room tonight. 40 to 90%. And that range is so wide because it depends on the body of work that you're looking at. But we know that more than 50 or close to 50% of the children who are coming in through early intervention have sensory processing challenges. And here's the thing, our service system in the state of California and across the United States, let alone talking about other nations, and many of you or a couple of you were interested in what's happening internationally. It's important to know it's an area that we typically do not look at fully. So even though we have an alarming amount of children that are showing up in our support and delivery systems, our response rate as far as really honing in on how we can provide support and services, those 40 to 90% of children are not getting the 90% or 100% of service based on that disorder. More than 40% of children with challenging behaviors experience sensory processing challenges. And usually I would do air quotes around challenging behaviors, but just think for a moment. A lot of children that may be having challenges in the classrooms, that may be having difficulty at home, at the local park. What we do not talk a lot about is that more than 40% of those children, they have things that are going on internally and they're processing and trying to organize the environment, and it's affecting their ability and it's affecting their behavior. And so we want to hold this information and keep it in full view as we have this conversation. The other thing is I want to pause and really lift up the parents that are in this space this evening, because we know that it's not easy. It can be very difficult when you have a child with a sensory processing, whether it's a disorder or a sensory processing difference. May not be diagnosed as a disorder, but you're noticing that there's some things that your child may be processing through their senses a little bit differently, right? So this can impact family life, how our children socially interact with other children, how they socially engage and interact even with family members in the house. We also know that school performance and developmental milestones for children between the ages of infancy to adolescence, there's an impact there. Sensory processing can contribute to higher levels of parent stress and family conflict and even disruption in the family system. So I'm priming the pump right now, and we're going to go into concrete examples to really breathe life into the research that you see here on your screen. But I just want us to slow down the pace a little bit and just kind of pause and understand how this information impacts children, and equally important, how it also impacts adults. Sensory processing differences in the classroom have become emotionally draining for teachers. And there are a lot of children, again, that show up in a classroom space and they're not supported because they're not eligible for services through our state delivery system, but yet they have these needs that need to be addressed. And it's been very difficult for a lot of teachers to respond to it. So tonight, for the educators that came into the space this evening, my hope is that you're going to walk away with either greater affirmation and or strategies that you can begin to implement as early as tomorrow morning when you walk back into your classroom. We're going to talk a little bit about shifting perspectives, right? Thinking about how did we used to think about this to how do we think about it now, right? So the old way of thinking about it is when a child was demonstrating difficulties or challenges in their sensory processing, we thought about the children or the child as being defiant, right? The new idea is he's lacking social skills, or he might be lacking a skill set or an opportunity to be able to express what it is that he's feeling, opposed to going directly to the behavior and defining it by blaming the child. We're understanding that maybe there's something that's missing that we actually need to teach the child. So there's a shift in our thinking. She's choosing to demonstrate this behavior. She's choosing to act this way, when in actuality, the sensory threshold could be so high or so low that the child feels like they're in a survival moment, right? Or their adrenaline is really high. So we have to think there are lots of reasons why children might be demonstrating behaviors the way that they are. And sensory integration is maybe a new concept for some of us, or a reminder as to why children might be demonstrating the behaviors that they are. A lot of times we thought about what's wrong with him, what's wrong with her, when in actuality we're saying what happened to him or her. Let's dig a little bit deeper and try to understand what's going on in this child's life. Let's understand how these lights right now might be impacting the child. Does something shift or change in the environment that we may not be aware of, but the child is so sensitive, with the sensitivity dialed into what's happening in that space that it's affecting them internally, right? We used to think, I don't need to call home because they won't help anyway. There's so much wisdom and information that a parent can provide for educators or the classroom that we should be calling to gain deeper insight. Maybe there's something that a parent can do or that they say or that they've tried at home that can have deep impact as to what I'm doing as an educator in the classroom. And then the other piece is we've heard things like, I won't tolerate disrespect. I don't like the way this child is acting, or he's being disrespectful, or she's being disrespectful, or they are being disrespectful. We're switching that language to lean in a little bit more and saying, how can I help them learn more about their body? Right? When I first started, I said, this is a social justice issue. So powerful to be able to help a child to understand what's going on with them internally and giving them the vocabulary and the words to understand that. So we talk a lot about voice and choice and giving children voice and choice. Okay. So I've been talking about this sensory integration processing, but I'm going to ask you to take a few moments and help me to name what they are. I'm going to ask you, can you name all the human sensory systems that's available to the human experience, right? Can you think about the senses that we use as humans to go about our daily life?
So Senta, this is a poll that Jackie's setting up, correct? Okay, excellent.
I just made it live, so.
Thank you.
We still have a lot of people answering. We're at 63%, going up. We are at 80%. Should I wait a little longer or?
So I'm going to ask for those of you that's in the room this evening that said yes, I can name the senses. I'm going to ask you to just take a few moments and drop them in the chat box. I'm not calling you out by any means. Let's just see, let's think about the senses and then let's weigh that with the information we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'll give you a hint. There are 5 that we all commonly know. Give you a hint. 5 we all commonly know. Let's see if we can light up the chat box and put in what do we believe. There are 8 that we're going to be talking about, and I'm giving you a hint. There are 5 that we commonly know. They're the big 5. And I can't see the chat box.
I can, and I am happy to share with you what's coming in. Sight, touch, smell, hearing, and vision.
Yes.
Sight,
So we have it sounds like Dr. K, if I'm catching you, we have
I was reading with my mute on. I'm so sorry. Sight, sound, taste, touch.
those are the big 5. Yes. Are those repeatedly coming in?
They're coming in olfactory, auditory, visual, touch, introspective, intuitive, emotional, movement, how the body fits in space, stimulation. They're moving by pretty quickly.
Excellent.
Balance.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
That's a great, actually, what you just read out loud is a great landing place for us to all think about it. So we know the big five, and it sounds like many of you identified the big five. We're going to introduce three more. So we're going to talk about a sensory system that is developed by eight. We're looking at eight, right? And we're looking at the work of Jean Ayres and how she introduced not only the theory, but the method of understanding sensory integration. And one of the ways by which she was able to do that was to break down all the different ways that we process information internally as human beings. So you're absolutely right. There's seeing, there's the visual aspect, there's hearing, the auditory, there's taste, there's touch, tactile, there's smell, what we smell, vestibular, someone talked about movement. The last three that I'm going to introduce to you, right? When we stop at the big five, six, seven, and eight, is really the innovative piece tonight that Dr. K introduced when she welcomed all of you to the experience. It's the three that we commonly do not talk about. And that's vestibular, which happens to do with movement. There's proprioception of understanding where our body parts are in space. And there's something called interoception. And interoception, if you've been working in sensory integration or have a body of knowledge around sensory integration, we now know that this is something that's new. We didn't have a name for it about 25 years ago. We could describe it as practitioners, we could describe it as therapists. And we knew from Jean Ayres' work, she was introducing this concept and information, but it did not take hold the way vestibular and proprioceptive did. And so I want to walk us through each one of these to help us to understand what do we mean by this and how does it show up. So by a show of hands, how many of you work in early childhood with young children? And I'm going to come out of screen for a moment just so I could see if you could use your emoji for a show of hands. Okay, I see hand claps, I see thumbs up. Excellent. Hands up. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right? We just talked about the eight. We talked about the big five, and we're introducing three more: vestibular, proprioceptive, and interoception, right? How many of you have worked with children during circle time? So I'm talking to my early childhood people, and then we'll go up the developmental scale in a few moments, okay? When children are sitting in circle time and their feet are straight out like this, and they're clicking their feet like this while they're, okay, I see a lot of smiles and head nods, right? They're clicking their feet, right? A lot of times children are doing that, right? Because they're asking to sit and attend, right? To keep their body still. When they're clicking their feet like this, it's like, okay, teacher, I'm going to sit here, but the way that I'm able to regulate my body and sit and be a part of this experience is doing my feet like this, right? We tend to spend time asking children to stop clicking their feet like this. And what ends up happening is that when we take that need or that desire away from the children, they will show other behaviors to get that unmet need taken care of, right? So when we talk about the clicking of the heels or going back and forth, that's feedback that's going into the body. Okay. Proprioceptive is pressure, information about where my legs are, where my feet are in body and space right now. I don't know if you've worked with children that would take their sweaters, and this is going now into elementary school. We see it in early childhood, but how many of you seen children that hold their sweaters and stuck on their sweaters, and this part of their sleeve is okay, wet, right? So some people would say that's tactile. Some people will say that that's proprioceptive. Some people will say that that's vestibular. And I'm just giving you examples. Sometimes children need to do that to release. I'm looking at all of you in the Zoom room, right? If we had the pleasure of being in the same room together at the same time tonight, many of you would not have stayed in the same position the entire evening. You have shifted your body weight from one place to another, right? Some of you have been playing with your hair. Some of you may have been doodling. We all have this need. We all activate all eight of those senses all the time. And we do it so Senta as a presenter I need to switch my body. I need to drink some water. I need to lean in a little bit more. I need to doodle because that helps me to pay attention and stay connected to what's happening right now. Because the adult brain can only take in so much information before we all check out. Okay. So physically, I see that you're all here, which I love it. Mentally, I'm hoping you're processing this information. And the reason why I keep using us as adults is because we want to activate the empathy. We want to understand what life must be like for that child that's having that experience right now in that moment. And I want us to understand that we all have those experiences. We've just learned how to work through them and to compensate for them. Okay. So proprioceptive, vestibular, interoception. Interoception, what's very fascinating is that some children may not understand when their stomach growls that they're hungry. They haven't learned that. Or when we get that sensation in our body to go use the bathroom, some children have not learned how to read those cues and they have to be taught to read those cues. When your stomach feels like this and you have them actually touch their stomach so they begin to connect with their mind and brain and organize and process, that means that you're hungry. Some children don't know that. So these are the things, or when we get really nervous or we get frightened, our hands get sweaty or our hearts start to beat really fast. Children are experiencing that, but it produces anxiety. And because the production of anxiety is there, we bear witness to behaviors. And sometimes those behaviors are difficult because the child cannot regulate in the moment the way that we want them to regulate. So we really want to understand what's happening in the lives of children. And again, the whole idea is to understand that there are a myriad of reasons why children behave the way that they do. And tonight we're asking you to, let's just assume that it's not always because there's trauma. Let's not assume that the child has a disability. Let's not assume that the child is not wanting to listen or follow directions. Let's assume that tonight, in talking about sensory integration, there's something going on with the body that the child is not able to articulate back to you in a way that you can see the purpose of it. Okay? So we're really unpacking this in a lot of different ways. I just want to share a couple of more things with you, and then we're going to actually practice some of this work ourselves. So again, thinking about the vestibular, the movement piece, I want to share with you that vestibular, when we talk about movement, it's not just the large limbs of our body, but vestibular can also have an impact on our speech and language because that is a motor activity in of itself. So I really want us to kind of unpack and think about these three areas a little bit more. For those of you who have worked with children, proprioception pressure is something that can be very calming and can activate the system into a calming state for children. So I don't know, for those of you that are parents or even as educators or therapists, sometimes when you just go behind a child and you put your hand on their back and you apply a little bit of pressure and you rub their back, you can see them begin to regulate and they're able to orient their body in a better way. So we're going to talk about these different strategies. And again, I'm not here to diagnose. I'm just helping us to think about, there's so many ways that we could think about behavior. And this is just another way to help us to understand and be advocates for children and ask questions as parents or as teachers that are related to perhaps the child might have some sensory processing differences. I'm not going to say a disorder, I'm not going to say a disability, but maybe some sensory processing differences that we need to pay attention to help this child be able to regulate and calm their body in this environment, whether it's home, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's at the park, or whether it's in the classroom. So here are a few things I'm going to ask you to think about. I'm asking us to think about this, what to look for in the absence of a disability. So I'm not saying that the child has autism and there's a dual diagnosis because the child is demonstrating sensory processing disorders that go along with that child's disability or that diagnosis. I'm going to ask for us to just think for a moment, when a child has not been officially identified or diagnosed, what are some things that we can pay attention to that we might want to be mindful of? right? So just take a few moments and look down this list. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but I will pull out a couple for us to pay attention to. And one of them is thinking about um, toe walkers, right? Children who walk on their toes. That if you're seeing a child who's a toe walker past the age of 3 years old, it's something that you want to pay attention to, right? Because that tells us that neurodevelopmentally there's something going on. The child may not be wanting to plant their feet on the ground because of the sensation of that, but also thinking about the vestibular movement and the information that the child is trying to organize. And you may not be able to see it, but it's how the brain is functioning and interpreting that information that's coming through the child's body. So something to think about and look for. The other thing is, if you look at any of these that are listed, if you think about a child in your life, or maybe a child that you've worked with before that has 3 or more of the things that are listed here, that's more than a gut check. That's saying that, you know what, this is something that we need to be looking at. Maybe we need to get a little bit more curious about it, ask a few more questions, begin to do deeper observations, because it's introducing that the child might have a sensory processing difference or a sensory processing challenge, or it might be the first example where we begin to understand that the child might have even a disorder. So I just want you to take a look at that list. Self-calming in of itself, a child having a difficult time self-calming, I'm not saying that that's related to sensory processing, a disorder or a difference. It could be child's just having a hard time because a transition occurred in the family life where it's raining outside and the child is used to a certain routine about how they get to school, and that routine has changed and the child's having a difficult time. That wouldn't necessarily say that the child has a sensory processing challenge, difference, or disorder. What I am saying though, if it's child is having difficulty with self-calming, the child is having difficulty motor planning, a child climbs up the stairs to get to the top of the slide at the park, but is at the top of the slide and begins to cry, and they can't seem to figure out to go down the slide or to come back down the stairs. That's an example of thinking about motor planning. If you have a 3 or more of these, then that's something that you really want to pay attention to. And we're just asking you to think about that as parents, as educators, or whatever your respective role is in helping to support children. The other thing I'll share with you is whenever we talk about sensory integration, we talk about modulation and we talk about regulation. So thinking about how we modulate, how we regulate, how we stabilize, how sometimes we go up or sometimes we go down, and thinking about how do we get to that calming threshold for a child. So if the light is incredibly bright, and the child has now changed in their behavior, or the child that is constantly leaning on the other children, sometimes we think that the child is trying to not follow instructions or be a disruption in class, when in actuality that child is searching for feedback in their body, and that pressure of leaning on a peer actually feels good and helps modulate or regulate the body. So under responsiveness, sensory seeking, and over responsiveness, that's how we begin to look at those 8 sensory systems that we introduced to you. Some children can be under responsive, where they have a high threshold, meaning that they have very low energy, under aroused, may have a difficult time orienting to what's happening in the environment, and they might have a high pain and noise tolerance. So in other words, a fire truck going by, for a child who's under responsive, you can have your windows open, that could be blaring, and the child is unaffected. If we were drop down on the slide and look at over responsiveness, a child that had heard that same noise, that has an over responsiveness, may become anxious, very rigid, may begin to yell, may begin to scream, may begin to run, may begin to retreat, right? Because it's too much information and it's activating the senses. There are some children who will seek out heavy vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile input, and that's the example that I gave, that sometimes children, whether they're clicking their feet, they're leaning on someone else, maybe their body when they're sitting at the desk or in their chair, they're slumped over or they're more engaged with the furniture and you would prefer for them to sit upright. Again, it doesn't mean that they're tired or they're hungry, or it may not mean that they're disengaged. It could be, I need that pressure on my body in order to regulate what I'm feeling internally inside. So I just want us to take a few moments, take a look at those under responsiveness, sensory seeking, over responsiveness. And I would love to go deeper into each one, but for the sake of time, I really want to be mindful. We're laying the foundation tonight. We're doing an introduction to what we mean about sensory integration and sensory processing. So continue to ride along with me, and we're going to do a little quick break. This is dedicated to Dr. K this evening. I'm going to ask you to do something called a 10-second sensory brain break. In a few moments, I'm going to put a timer up, and I'm going to invite you to either stretch your body, touch your toes, snap your fingers, wiggle your fingers, jog in place, drink some water, laugh, kiss someone you love, tell someone you love them, shut your eyes for a moment to just take a break from looking at the screen, stand in the sunshine. If you want to dance a little bit, do a little dance, text a message to a friend, chant, pray, breathe, eat a piece of chocolate. But I'm going to ask you to take 10 seconds to do that, because we're going to shift into the last component of our work tonight, and we're going to go into the strategies. Again, we laid the foundation. Now we're going to give you some ideas and strategies. And remember, everything that we talk about this evening can be used for all children. When you get to the point that you're concerned that a child might have some sensory processing challenges, you want to seek services and support. You want to look into physical therapy, occupational therapy. You want to tap into the resources at your child's local school district. So I'm not saying that these are blanket things to use regardless of a child's diagnosis or disability or sensory processing difference. We want to be mindful, and there are experts that can help us to be mindful. Tonight was really helping us to understand sometimes we're quick in our different professions and even as parents to attach a label or to make an assumption about a child's behavior. We want to expand and get us thinking like there could be a myriad of reasons, lots of reasons why a child is demonstrating behavior. And let's not be so quick to go to, oh, it's because the child must have a disability, or the child is trying to be defiant, or the child has a challenging behavior. And I use the word defiant very loosely, but what we're saying is let's be more thoughtful and more mindful that there are lots of reasons why children may be demonstrating and seeking what they're seeking. And this is another strategy or a tool for us to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a clock. I'm going to ask you to take a brain break for a moment. You could turn off your cameras. I'm going to invite you to come back, though, and turn your cameras on in a matter of 10 seconds. Look at this list and choose something from the list, or choose something that you want to do for yourself right now in a matter of the next 10 seconds. And then we'll come back and go to the last part of our work together tonight. So here we go. Some of you didn't turn your cameras off, but I did get to see some of you taking a moment. I thought I saw somebody do a namaste. Somebody must have been breathing. What did you do in that 10 seconds? Did you at least close your eyes and kind of take a break? Yeah, okay, I see some head nods. Drop in the chat box. What did you do? Did you at least close your eyes? Did you stretch your body? Did you change your position? Did you take a drink of water? What did you do to help regulate so that you can stay engaged in this process that we're in right now?
I see that people took a breath, got up and stretched, closed their eyes, looked out, took off the headphones, ate some chocolate, laid down, stretched, wiggled my toes, watched my kids play. That's an excellent one. And you also have people, Senta, who are articulating, their own child is going through this sensory issue, and they're just really leaning in to get this information and learning more. Thoughts of gratitude, stretched, gave my daughter a kiss, grabbed some dinner. There you go. There you go. And Senta, I'm going to remind you it's 6:07 and Karen is here with us. And if
Oh,
you'd like her to introduce now, or do you want 6:15?
no, I love that. That's a perfect
Perfect.
segue. Yes, let's do that. And then we'll come back and get into some strategies.
Okay. Somebody's dog got a hug too. I love that. Okay, everyone, as we started our time together this evening, we mentioned that we always like to introduce the next trainer to you. And Miss Karen Marino has joined us this evening. And Karen has 21 plus years as an early musical stimulation teacher. She is a behavioral therapist. She is a very proud mother. And she is going to be joining us on Monday, February 7th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Jackie will make sure everyone on this call receives that invitation. She'll be talking about respectful parenting, healthy and respectful socialization. But most importantly, Karen is coming on to do our training on February 7th, completely in Spanish. Everyone is welcome. We will have live interpretation in English, just as we do this evening in Spanish. So we're going to invite Karen to go into the Spanish channel. And Karen, you can say hello here if everyone wants to see you. There you are.
Hi, thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello, and we're going to invite you to go into the Spanish channel, and then we're going to invite Alex to come into the English room, and you can do your introduction in Spanish this evening.
Thank you. Hola, buenas noches a todas, a todos. Es un gusto verlos aquí y estoy muy contenta de invitarlos al training que vamos a tener. Y bueno, va a ser precisamente para padres, terapeutas o maestros que tenemos pequeñitos. Y es básicamente para trabajar, tratar de nosotros ver qué podemos hacer para ayudar a prevenir el abuso infantil desde que son bebés y hasta los 4 o 5 años de edad. ¿Qué herramientas les podemos dar naturalmente como padres o como maestros para ayudarles en ese proceso de poder pues prevenir el abuso, no únicamente abuso sexual, pero cualquier otro tipo de abuso infantil en su futuro? Y bueno, gracias, es un placer, espero verlas pronto a todas por ahí.
Thank you so much, Karen. Senta, can you hear me okay in the English room now? Okay, my screen wasn't really working beautifully. Thank you so much, Karen. We're so excited to see you, and we look forward to hearing all of your wisdom on February the 7th. Okay, gracias, mi amiga. Buenas noches.
Gracias, buenas noches. Bye, thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, and Senta, we're back to you.
Wonderful. Gosh, there's so many exciting opportunities for learning and development and growth in so many ways. So I'm excited about Karen's presentation that's going to happen in a couple of weeks. And it's wonderful to see your face this evening. We're going to continue with, we're going to move into some strategies. We're coming up toward the end of our time tonight. And I want to ask you to think for a moment about, again, the child and the adult. And for this example, I'm going to talk about the child and I'm going to talk about a parent perspective. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to think about why removal of recess for a child with a sensory processing challenge, difference, or disorder, why that's not a good idea. Removal of recess. Why do you think that may not be a good idea for a child who might be experiencing sensory processing challenges, differences, or disorder? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to ask you to think about how a trip to a grocery store with the child who might be having a sensory processing challenge, difference, or disorder could be impactful for the child and for the parent. Okay, so two scenarios I'm giving you. You could choose either one. One is removal of recess. The other example is why might a trip that we all often take to some place like the grocery store might present challenges for a child as well as a parent. And while you're putting those thoughts in the box, I can't help myself but to ask Amy, do you pronounce your last name Kosi?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button.
That's okay. That's awesome. I've been gifted that nickname, and so I kept looking at it tonight, and I was thinking, I wonder if she pronounces it Kosi. So, an unexpected connection that I had with you this evening that you didn't know about, but I had to mention it. It looks like there are a lot of thoughts that are coming up in the chat box in regards to, yes, recess is an outlet and an opportunity for children to reset. Absolutely. Historically, it has been known that when children are being redirected or there's some type of consequence that needs to be made because of behaviors that are coming up in the classroom, recess is not as common as it used to be, but it's still a common practice that's taken away from them. And I just encourage everyone to look in the chat box for the wisdom that's coming up from the knowledge that's in this room, and keep that in mind. So even as a parent, when you hear that a teacher is sharing with you that I had to keep him in, or I had to keep her in, or I had to keep them in during recess today because they had a very difficult time following instructions in class, that is more of a punitive approach, and it could be really destructive to a child who needs that outlet, who needs to move their body in space. So thank you so much for putting that in there. And then in regards to a common trip to a grocery store, right? Something that pretty much we all have had experience doing can have a tremendous impact on a child who has a sensory processing challenge, difference, or a disorder. And so there's preparation that all goes into that and preparing the child to navigate that experience. Because as many of you have put in the chat box, the smells that accompany a grocery store experience. And I'm hoping that the next time you go into a grocery store, all of this is going to just kind of flood your memory bank, that you're going to be more sensitive or aware to the smells, what it's like to stand in line and wait your turn to put your groceries on the conveyor belt or to pay your money, what you have to do to regulate. We know what that feels like as adults, especially if someone opens up their pocketbook and they're counting coin by coin by coin by coin. We've all have been there in some way or another. So just thinking about being sensitive to that, of what that child might be experiencing in that moment. And then the temperature zones, right? So again, I've been in situations where people have side-eyed parents, right? Like, why is your child acting like that in the grocery store? Limited sensitivity and empathy for the experience of the child, limited sensitivity and empathy for the experience of the parent that has to navigate an experience that every family should have, right? And that's to be able to go provide for their family and get them the food that they need. But there are often decisions or judgments that are made. And so we really want to help parents. We don't even think about it sometimes, but we really want to talk about that. And that the store is overwhelming for the child and difficult for the parent to manage. Yeah, short trips, right? Regulating experiences. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things that would be really helpful for parents. And again, some of you may be aware of this information, and some of us in the space may not be. And that's the beauty of us coming together. I'm going to quickly but thoughtfully do this so that we could at least have a few moments to do a Q&A. But here we are talking about effective strategies for children, how children find what we call the middle ground or the comfort zone to be able to manage, maneuver, and work through challenges of daily life. I will say to you that some children who have sensory processing, and I'm going to use these three terms and you keep hearing me say it: disorder, challenge, or difference, right? Sensory processing disorders, challenges, or differences. Moving through life can be very complicated, but there are things that we could do to lessen the complication and help children move more into a middle ground or a sensory zone that brings calm and creates some level of comfort. So let's talk a little bit about these things. And again, keep in mind the example of recess, removing recess, and keep in mind the example of visiting a grocery store as two concrete ways to think about this work. You see in this example, sometimes children need that weighted material or information so that it grounds their body. And we were talking about the proprioceptive experience and children needing the pressure and being able to understand where their body parts are, how everything comes together in regards to receiving information about where their bodies show up in time and space. And so in this example, taking empty water bottles and filling them with water of different variations and volumes, putting different colors in there, different glitter sequence, not only is it a sensory experience visually, it becomes a sensory experience tactily. And then if a child needs additional input and information, they have that resource and that information that's available to them. In this situation, you could do that in a park, you can do that in your yard, you can do that at a playground, at a school. And not only do the children that need that input and information benefit from it, but it's amazing to see how all the other children actually come and benefit from that as well. You don't have to hang it from a string. And I have a feeling that if all of you show up for Karen's session, I'm sure she's going to talk about some make and take, some things that you could do at home, and some things that you could reinforce in helping children to learn more about their body and space and how to use music and information to regulate the body. And this is just an example. You could use an empty water bottle and you don't have to hang it from a room or a string. You could actually have it readily available for the child. What we're talking about now are sensory calming strategies and tools. When I introduced the word interoception, and I shared with you there are children that don't recognize that my heart is beating really fast because I'm feeling anxious right now, or my heart is beating really fast because I've been running all around the yard. And instead of me slowing down and catching my breath, I just keep going, and that produces more anxiety, and you start seeing more behavior. Sometimes when you could just tell a child to put their hand over their chest and they feel their heartbeat. Some children are startled initially because they have never been taught to actually feel what their body is communicating to them. But it's very powerful when a child can put their hand over their heart and feel their heart beating, and to have an adult say to them, your body might be telling you to slow down, right? It's amazing when children come back to you and they take your hand and put it on their heart, and they're letting you know that I now know what that means and what that feels like, and I'm going to sit, or I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to move my body a little bit differently. So again, we're helping children to begin to understand that the sensations that they have internally is communicating something to them. And just like how we do for social emotional language, we help children develop that language. We also need to help children that are having sensory processing challenges, differences, or disorders to represent that language and begin to use it, whether they're using sign language, whether they're using their words, whether they're using word approximations. But all these things that we're showing you is allowing children to be able to understand more about themselves. And it's not a judgment, it's an understanding. So just thinking about something like that as an example. Again, I had shared with you that some children do not recognize that the grumbling that happens inside their stomach is an indicator that I'm hungry. So there's a great book, if you haven't had a chance, there's a whole series of them called I Feel Something. And it teaches children that have interoception differences, challenges, or disorders, how to begin to read their body language. And it's just a beautiful way to connect with children from very young children all the way to looking at children who are in elementary school between the ages of up to 11 and 12 years old. But really helping children to begin to understand, what am I feeling inside and what language can I use, in creating calmness around it. Imagine if any of you have vertigo, um, or if you experience vertigo, or you have someone that you know in your life, it can be very, very unsettling to have an onset of a sense of a situation or a sensation in your body that you have no control over, and is very disorienting. And then you're trying to figure out what's going on with my body right now. Children have those experiences all the time. And if we have that knowledge and information to help navigate and help them to understand, we should be doing that. And that's why it's a call to social justice. Sometimes children need a little bit more feedback and input. So when there's a lot of activity and it's high in the house, again, this is a strategy you don't necessarily have to use for children who might be having challenges with sensory processing or taking information in. But you would be amazed if you couch children. You want to be careful, of course, but couching children in between pillows, because that feedback feels so comfortable and it really helps regulate the body. So again, it doesn't have to be a child with a disability. It doesn't have to be a child with a sensory processing disorder. Sometimes when the activity is really high, your body needs to reset and it's disorienting. And so just think about when you're really upset because you're emotional and someone comes and puts their arm around you, and that pressure or that feeling of getting a hug, what that feels like for you. It's very similar to what the children might be experiencing when you put pillows on top or roll them in a blanket and they get that feedback. This is another example of just taking a Ziploc bag and just putting different items in there for a baby to be able to feel, touch, see. It also helps with working on, I can do a whole piece on children with physical disabilities, but just as another way, again, to help children to be able to regulate, to be able to have that tactile feedback and input. And it's just thinking about how you can do everyday things around your environment. This is an example of a young child, of course, but you can also do this with older children with locks. And if you think about chains, when you go to like a hotel, or many of you might have them in your home where you unlock the chain or you turn the clicks of a lock. Same exact thing. It's just you're seeing it for a young child versus what it might look like for an older child. A sensory kit, going to the grocery store, having a backpack, and the backpack is loaded with information that helps pass the time, right? So even being in the cart, reading a book, having the child push the cart, that's giving that pressure and that feedback to the body that the child might be in need of, especially during the time of being in the grocery store, for all the reasons that you put in the chat box, right? And then again, the backpack serves as pressure and input for children that may be needing that, whether it's a proprioceptive need or a vestibular need or a tactile need. So again, prepping for those experiences, we're going to the grocery store, thinking about what happens before the grocery store experience, during the grocery store experience, and after the grocery store experience. And many times children can keep it together, but the moment they get back in the car, they let it all out. So again, just thinking about before, during, and after, and being able to prepare for those experiences. So again, the child has the release, but they also have the reset to help bring their body back into regulation or being able to modulate. Fidget bracelets. These are really cool. You see the zippers where the children can zip their bracelets back and forth as a way to get that tactile or sensory input. The keychain is another example where children can just loop it onto the pocket of their, or excuse me, to the loop of their belt buckle loop, and have that hanging there, and just the sensation of being able to regulate their body because they have something calming to hold or to manipulate to get that sensory processing back into a space that's comfortable and that's calming for them. Another example is thinking about pencil toppers, and these are all things that you could do at home. And thinking about different grasps, because sometimes children need additional input, especially when they're doing regular daily tasks on a daily basis. I want to mention that the sensitivity of children often being judged coming to school and the hair is not combed or the teeth are not brushed, that I'm asking all of us to have a level of empathy for the child, but also for the parent. Children who have sensory processing disorders, challenges, or differences, something like getting your hair brushed can be very painful and it can be triggering, right? Sometimes you got to pick and choose. I'd rather send my child to school. He showed up, he's here. His hair may not be combed, but that was a whole experience in and of itself. So giving grace and understanding what those experiences might be like for parents is really important. The one in the middle is just those inflatable pools. I know when I was little, we used to have them all the time every summer because we couldn't afford a pool, but It's putting pillows in the pool, and it's a great way to contain space for children. It's a beautiful space for children to be able to read books. You can do the same thing in a plastic pool that you can get at Walmart or Target. But creating space so children have a sense of boundary is another way to think about that. And first then language is just reminding children they tend to process when we can break the steps down into meaningful and manageable tasks, right? So first, I need you to put your shoes on, then we can, or first, let's get your backpack, and that's the backpack that you're going to take for the grocery store, and then we're going to go to the grocery store. But that prep work is incredibly important. The last thing I'm going to share with you, and this is just another example that sometimes when you just get children even to carry things, it helps regulate their body and puts them back into a space of being able to be present. I want to share a short video. No, I don't. And no, I'm not. I'm going to ask you to take a few moments and just look at this slide. See if you can identify something that's standing out to you that you're like, the next time my child or children that I care for that may seem like they're dysregulated or they're moving their body too much or they're leaning up against a friend, what are some things that I could do to help them have input and to reorient their body and their space to the moment of what they need to move into more of a calming space. So I'm just going to leave this up here for a moment. And then I'm going to come out of screen.
And Senta, while you're coming out of screen, if I can quickly share, Karen Marino will be here on February 7th, but I wanted to make sure to announce that tomorrow evening on February 1st, from 6 to 7 p.m., Annie Rodriguez will be doing a Zoom training for mindset and building confidence in yourself and children. And this training is hosted by Foster Kinship Care Education, Rhonda Carlson, one of our community partners. And we can make sure tomorrow morning, any of you that are interested, Jackie can send the Zoom link and information. And certainly if you're interested, you can put it in the chat box or you can send an email over. But tomorrow evening from 6 to 7 p.m. via Zoom, mindset building confidence in yourself and children with our foster kinship care education partners. So thank you, Senta. I wanted to pop in and make sure everyone knew about that tomorrow evening. We're going to be bringing so many trainings to you each month, and we want everybody to continue to participate and bring this information into your life in a very real way. Thank you, Senta. I'll let you continue.
And I'm just going to do a process that we often talk about. We're going to wrap in versus wrap up. This has been a really honorable, humbling opportunity just to be in space with each other and think about the information, expanding our understanding about assumptions concerning children's behavior and thinking about how children develop. I'm going to ask you to take a few moments and think about what is one thing that will continue to live with you long after this training is over. And it could be something that you were reminded of or something that you heard for the very first time. But just one thing, a thought, a word, a strategy, a statement, something that will continue to live with you. And take time to do this for yourself so that you can commit to memory what's important to you.
There's a lot coming in the chat box, Senta. I don't know if you can see it, but all behavior is communication, the 3 extra sensories, seeing the child first, giving children an outlet, sensory input is more complex, all things that children do is for a reason. A lot of wisdom coming into the chat box.
That's excellent.
And I also want to mention, Senta, while people are thinking the different types of regulation, while more ideas are coming through, a lot of you are interested in the training tomorrow evening. So Jackie will be sure to put the link to the Zoom in the chat box as well as send it out tomorrow. how sensory is processed on the brain, varying from under-responsive, sensory-seeking, and over-responsiveness. So a lot coming through here. Senta, people are taking away really concrete information.
That's beautiful. The other thing that I will share with all of you, if you have a question that was not answered this evening, drop it in the chat box, because we have a way of sending the information out, because resources are going to come to you based on what we did this evening. But if there's a question that's centered on your heart and mind that you felt like, you know what, I really would like some guidance or information on this, please drop it in the chat box and we'll be sure to be responsive to that as well.
Absolutely. We also ask you to click on the link for the evaluation of this evening's training. Really, really important to us. We want to bring the top quality trainers to you every single time, and your input feedback is very important to us. So make sure you fill out the evaluation form, as well as find information tomorrow for tomorrow evening's training. And then, as Senta said, we have ways to get back to you if you have questions that were not answered. So Senta, yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to point out, I think Rhonda is actually on the call. I think she may be able to drop in the link.
Yes, she just did. Rhonda just put in the chat box, Tuesday, February 1st, 6 to 7 p.m. And she put the Zoom link. Thank you, Jackie. And Senta, it is now upon 6:30, so I'm going to give you the last words before we say goodnight to everyone.
The last word that I would share with you is to think about the power of 8, to remember the power of your relationship with children, and to be inquisitive and curious. And remember, there are lots of reasons why children may be demonstrating what they're demonstrating through their behavior, and how can we support and help. It's been phenomenal that all of you showed up tonight. You could have been anywhere else, but you showed up to be here. So thank you for showing up for children, and equally important, showing up for yourselves. It was my honor and pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Senta Greene. It was our honor to have you join us here this evening, provide so many practical tools. I see so many great words coming in through the chat box. It is an honor to be a part of this community. We show up, we stand up, and we speak up for children. So we're going to stay here and make sure if there's questions coming through that we get them. And also the links that are in the chat box will be up for a little bit longer. Please fill out the evaluations, and please, please, please stay tuned. Come back and join us. It's so great to see all of you. Thank you so much. Be safe and go enjoy your families. Good night, Dina. I was going to say, Alexandra, if you wanted to come back and let us know. Did you have a room full of Spanish speakers this evening?
I'm not sure how I was supposed to see that. to
Oh,
be
okay.
honest.
Okay. I thought sometimes they show up, Jackie, we sometimes ask them to put it next to their name. So I wasn't paying
Oh,
attention.
I wasn't able to see that. Sorry.
Okay. Good, good. Well, thank you so, so much. We look forward to having you join us as often as you can.
Thank you so much. I love to be part of this, to be honest.
Thank you. There's so much to learn. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Okay, buenas noches.
And I'm a teacher as well, so yeah.
Oh,
There's
yay.
learning a
Gracias, buenas noches.
lot.
Gracias.
Ay, qué
Buenas
bueno,
noches.
gracias, Inés. Gracias.
Gracias. All
So,
right. Thank you.
Thank you
We'll
for
see you
having me.
soon. Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. I don't know if Veronica is still here. I see your question in the chat box. And there will be information and the PowerPoint slides that will not be sent out to everyone in general, but you can certainly contact us, contact Jackie. And when
Okay,
those things are available, we'll be sure to let you know.
super. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
I am
Thank
still
you.
here. I was trying
Okay.
to get what I could now.
Oh, good.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very, very much.
Veronica. Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay, you too. All
Bye-bye.
right, bye-bye.
Jackie, will you be saving down the chat box for us? And I think I'll stop recording now.